So today I'm going to talk about this book project that has just been published, or it will be published in a couple of weeks, but it's already done. So the title is Beyond Nature and Nurture, Perspectives on Human Multidimensionality. And basically the book brings together, the idea of the book is to bring people from different disciplines, psychology, biology, philosophy, sociology, to talk about this important problem, the nature versus nurture problem. I started to think of this project several years ago because I formally studied philosophy but also sociology, and I saw a tendency in many sociology departments that they were not happy with biological explanations because they had fear of biological reductionism, which is a very big problem. At the same time, when I was talking to biologists and psychologists, they were not usually happy either with sociological explanations because they thought that many sociologists, they were radical constructionists and they were ignoring how biological factors play a role in human behavior and so on. So I was a bit sad because I saw how these different disciplines and these different communities, they were doing their works in an isolated way. And I wanted to bring them together, for people from different disciplines, to talk about this because I think that there are problems that are multidimensional, which means that we need people from different disciplines because there is some kind of giant puzzle. So we need different pieces from biology, psychology, history, philosophy to try to make sense of it. So first of all, I will try to talk briefly about the main structure of the book. The book is divided into two main parts. The first part is the nature versus nurture debate, and the second part is case studies in the nature versus nurture debate. So in the first part, all the contributors that, as I say, they come from different disciplines, they, all of them have in common try to overcome the simplistic binary between something is cultural or something is biological. So they try to bring, they try to argue how we have to overcome this with different kind of arguments from an updated scientific and philosophical arguments. And in part two, we have we have here Cayetani Sense's excellent contribution. Atsuko Fujino Sense, she was the dean of the sociology department in Kyoto Sangyo University, and gave in a talk from North Texas University, and Jun Nohara also from Sangyo Kyoto University. So we have different scholars who apply their knowledge to specific cases in which the traditional binary between nature and nurture does not work. So these are the main two parts, and as I say, all the contributors from different disciplines, from different perspectives, they have all in common the attempt to overcome this simplistic binary. The case studies, most of them, they are not set in Western. They don't focus on Western examples, but usually because there is a tendency in the Western world usually to ignore the rest of the world. And of course, there are many cultures and many countries that we can not examine in the book because of a lack of space. But at least we have tried to bring people from different parts of the world and to bring examples in this debate that transcend the Western world. So I will, in the first part of my talk, I will try to talk about the general spirit of the book, and later I will try to talk about my specific contribution. So I would like to start with the enigma of the Sphinx. What is that? It's one of the most famous puzzles in ancient Greece. So the Sphinx was killing everybody who was unable to answer this riddle, okay? What creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And Oedipus said, oh, it's the human being. Because in the beginning, the baby is just walking on 4 legs, and later an adult is walking on 2 legs, and the elderly using a stick they are using 3 legs. But what really matters is not the answer of the human being. There is something beyond. Yeah, okay, the human being is the answer, and the Sphinx stopped killing people, and Oedipus was happy only for a brief period of time, if we know the story of Oedipus. But in any case, there is a deeper enigma. What or who is the human being? For Kant and other philosophers, this is the most important philosophical question. Why? Because the human being is not a transparent reality. What does it mean that the human being is not a transparent reality? It means that whatever the human being is, we don't agree with it. So Muslims have their definition, communists they have their definition, and Christians and ancient Egyptians and Taoists and Shinto and Confucianists, and so we can agree on, around the world, we can agree on specific knowledge of physics or chemistry or biology, but we don't agree, neither in history nor now, on what is or who is the human being. That doesn't mean that whatever the human being is doesn't speak for itself. It has to be interpreted. It's a very complex reality. Otherwise, we would agree, yeah, of course, it's obvious what the human being is. So the main perspective of the book is that the human being is a multidimensional and dynamic entity. What does it mean that it's a multidimensional entity? That it has different dimensions, different features. It's very tempting to reduce one of the features of the human being to only one: the biological feature, the physical one, the historical one, the religious one, the sociological one. This temptation has been repeated over and over and over and over, and it's also repeated again. So when we have a famous scientist, a biologist, he or she is going to have the biological definition of the human being. And that biologist usually will try to downplay other dimensions of the human being. The sociologist will do something similar usually. He or she will try to focus on the sociological dimension of the human being, and usually will try to downplay or even ignore other dimensions of the human being. And then there is a problem. And why there is a problem? Because people fight. No, the human being is this. No, the human being is that. And this has practical consequences, because political systems, law systems, ethical systems, they are predicated on different definitions and different approaches to the human being. So the idea of the human being that we have is going to have practical consequences. So this is not only a speculative, theoretical issue that is interesting only for philosophers or scientists who have nothing better else to do. So this is interesting also for everyone, because this has a very powerful practical consequences. To make things worse, there is the paradox of interdisciplinarity. What is the paradox? The paradox is that usually interdisciplinarity is promoted, but it's also punished. What do I mean by that? It's promoted, like, okay, yeah, we have to be, we need interdisciplinary approaches, but in many institutions is punished. Why? Because if you publish in different fields, it's harder to get a tenure promotion. It's harder to get a position. Like, okay, what are you, a sociologist, a philosopher, a psychologist? We're going to judge only by one category. You choose. This happens in Spain, for instance. I have sociology publications, I have philosophy publications, and for many things I have to choose. And if I only publish on one only field, it's easier to promote. So this is the paradox of interdisciplinarity. It's promoted, with open mouth, long live interdisciplinarity, but there are also institutional mechanisms to punish it or to not give many incentives for interdisciplinarity. So what happens? The paradox, the Buddhist paradox, although this paradox also appears in other in the traditions, of the blind man and the elephant. What's the paradox? There were some wise men who were fighting for the definition of truth. And they were fighting and fighting. And according to one of the versions of the story, Buddha took them, because they were blind. In other stories, they had a blindfold. It doesn't matter. And they took them, he took them to a room, and he told them, okay, you are going to touch the same object. You have to tell me what object are you touching. One man was touching the tail. Oh, it's a snake. Oh, no, this is a column. Oh, it's a fan. No, this is a wall. They started to fight again. Fight again. Why? Because all of them were partially right and partially wrong. They were touching different dimensions, different perspectives of a very complex thing. So the meaning of the paradox is, don't try to universalize your perspective. Your perspective works in this specific context. The biological perspective, the historical perspective, the sociological perspective. But if you try to universalize your perspective to the whole thing, it's not going to work. So the nature versus nurture debate is also very old, because there are debates, there are problems about artificial intelligence, about climate change that are relatively new. But the nature versus nurture debate is very old. It's maybe the most, or the first episodes of this debate happens in ancient Greece and in China. So in ancient Greece, we know that the Greek sophists, they had the binary between nomos, and nomos is law, convention, education, culture, something that translated to our perspective is socially constructed and historically contingent. Nomos is this, and physis is nature. So the sophists were saying people believe that things are explained by physis when in truth are explained by nomos. So slavery is not natural, it's socially constructed. The inequalities between men and women in the same social class are socially constructed, or the differences between. So the sophists, they were trying to say, usually on average, that people have a tendency to naturalize things, to normalize things, to believe that things that are socially constructed, that depends on costume, on culture, and on education, they have the tendency to ignore those sociocultural mechanisms and to believe that those things are natural, immutable, written on stone. We also have in China Mencius, who is maybe the most important Confucian scholar after Confucius, and Sun Tzu. And this debate is very famous because in the Western world they compare the debate between Rousseau and Hobbes. So Mencius said, we are good, we are born good, and society and culture or the wrong education can corrupt us. But Sun Tzu said, no, we are born selfish. We are born with a dark soul. And then society and culture and education has to domesticate us. So again, the nature-nurture debate. And of course, Zhong Song, which is during the warring stage in China before the unification by the Qing state, he said something very important. Are kings, generals, and ministers merely born into their kind? Like, you are really born a king? Or you are made a king? So this is also, for us, these are trivial questions, but in the times where they were not. So now I will talk briefly, although this is very complex, some of the mechanisms, updated scientific explanations through which the contributors of the book, in one way or in other, they overcome the simplistic nature-nurture dichotomy. For instance, brain plasticity. We thought in the past that the brain was a fixed structure, like the structure of this computer, but we know that the brain is not only plastic, that it's even better. We have the most plastic brain in the animal kingdom because we are born before time, let's say that. It means that because of bipedestation, we are born in a stage in which the brain of the baby, continues developing not in the uterus of the mother, but in the social matrix. And we also have the most plastic culture. Animals also have cultures, but our cultures are more plastic. And we also have epigenetics. What is epigenetic? We thought in the past that we have genes that predetermine features of our behavior, of our body, and we have those things, we have genes, they are real. But epigenetics is a biological discipline that has proved that there are genes that are activated, are active, like on and off, depending on the environment, depending on your biography. So maybe you are born with a genetic tendency for depression, or you are born with a genetic tendency for psychopathy, or you are born with a genetic, but if you live in a structured environment, those genes are never activated. But if you suffer bullying, if you live in a broken family, in a neighborhood full of violence, bang, those genes can activate. What it means that genes are more plastic, more dynamic than we thought. Depending on the environment, depending on our decisions, on our biography, our ideology, they are active or not. Genes that are key in our behavior. We also have niche construction. What is that? Usually when we think about Darwinian selection, we think in a natural environment selecting animals. But the situation is far more complex because animals, they also shape their environments. They modify their environments. So animals are selected by environments that they have modified. Those environments are cultural, are artificial, are natural. All these mechanisms, they overcome the simplistic binary, whether this is totally nature or this is completely nurture. We also have the Baldwin effect, which is a fascinating effect. It means that culture has the power to genetically modify animals and also the human being. Why? Because animals also have cultures. Human beings are not the only animals with culture. There are other animals, many animals with complex cultures. So if a culture is a system of meanings that are socially learned and socially shared. There are some behaviors that are learned that have an adaptative advantage for animals. So animals learn. This is cultural, let's say that. With the passage of time, that behavior becomes key for survival. So there is a genetic variability with the passage of time. So some animals, they learn the behavior faster than others. Let's say they are genetically better to learn the behavior better than others. With the passage of generations and generations, one behavior that was totally learned in the beginning becomes almost an instinct, becomes automatized. So many automatic mechanisms that we have with fire, with corpses, with predators, the scientific hypothesis is that in the past, long past, they were totally learned, but with the passage of time, became part of our hardwired nature. This is natural, this is artificial, this is, again, the Baldwin effect, and this is famous with the digestion of milk in Asian traditions, if they can digest milk worse or better, depending on some enzymes that they have. So culture modifies our biology. also have the impact of maternal hormonal levels during pregnancy on fetal development. What does it mean? For instance, if a woman has a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, because she lives in an environment with domestic violence, broken family, poor infrastructures, poverty, diseases, if there are social stressors around that mother, the cortisol is not only a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone, so it works also in the blood torrent, it goes to the fetus, and a normal high levels of cortisol is going to change the development of the brain of the baby. It doesn't mean that the baby is going to have some kind of cognitive disability. It can be as smart as anyone else, but that baby maybe will have a tendency to have less empathy, for more aggression, because those abnormal cortisol levels has changed the hardwire, the connectome of the brain. We also have how infants inherit intestinal flora from their mothers. And this is very important because, for instance, there are key neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut. For instance, serotonin, which is a key neurotransmitter for depression, for well-being. So depending on not only on your diet, depending on your intestinal flora, the serotonin levels can change, and that is going to have an impact in your behavior, in your emotions, and this depends on cultural norms, dietary norms. So this is cultural, this is natural, this is artificial, this is all these problems, they go beyond that. And of course, other animals have complex cultures, and the relative independence of culture and its causal power. What does it mean? This is what the second part of my talk is about. My contribution. Cultural sociology is a school of sociology mainly developed by Ron Eierman, Jeffrey Alexander, and other scholars at Yale University that emphasizes the relative independence of culture. The relative independence of culture is a traditional Marxist concept by Althusser, Bourdieu, and many others, Mannheim, that for the cultural sociology school of today, they think that Marxists, although they emphasized the relative independence of culture, they also had a tendency to reduce culture to class struggle, to class inequality. So they never took completely seriously the thesis of the relative independence of culture. What does it mean? That our biology and our social structure, our environment, all those factors do not predetermine cultural factors. What does it mean? That the same environment, the same kind of social stratification can allow different cultural systems. If you study the environment of a society, if you study the human population, human density, you cannot predetermine how the language is going to be, because there is a relative degree of independence. And further than that, the thesis of the relative independence of culture also emphasizes that culture has a causal power. Culture is not an epiphenomenon, as many reductionistic scholars have thought, that culture is some kind of predetermined product of depending on our economy, depending on the environment, depending on our biology. Culture is not only relatively autonomous, it also has a causal power. What does it mean? That culture can modify social structure, can modify the environment, can modify our own biology through downward causation. It's obvious with climate change. It's something cultural. It depends on our factories, our ways of production, and we are changing the chemical composition of the atmosphere. But we are also changing the chemical composition of the oceans, of the seas. We are also changing all the biomes of the world. So there are very, very few primordial forests. For instance, we have changed all of them. So culture changes society, biology, chemistry, physics. So this complexity, these causal lines are far more complex than people previously thought. So we move away from both cultural idealism. Cultural idealism is the thesis that culture has nothing to do with economy, human density of population, the environment. Cultural idealism is wrong, that's obvious. And it's very difficult to find a sociologist or a cultural anthropologist today that defends cultural idealism, because it's obvious that the environment, the biology, the ways of production, the diet has an impact on society and culture. So cultural idealism, nobody really takes cultural idealism seriously, but biological reductionism, it's very famous. So some people try to explain violence, homicide, suicide, mainly by biological factors, but that's a mistake. We only have to see that the homicide rate between different countries are completely different. For instance, if we compare the homicide rate in Japan or in the United States, do Americans have a totally different biology? No. This is society and culture. The violent rate of Chicago or Baltimore is far, far higher than other American cities. Do they have a different biology, different genes? No, it's the society, it's something cultural. And the same with the suicide patterns, the same with rape patterns, with the good and with the worse. Many features and behaviors that many biologists try to explain. For instance, it's like, oh, men have a lower life expectancy than women because they have higher testosterone levels, and then they are more prone to some forms of cancer, and they are more prone to have more heart diseases. But we know that because of culture, men usually are encouraged to run faster, drive faster, smoke more, drink more alcohol, take more drugs, fight more. So, and those patterns depend on different societies, different moments of history, different social classes. This is something, so how cultural and social factors, they have an impact on behaviors that were previously explained mainly by biology. So we also move away from biological reductionism because it's wrong, it's false, and we have mountains of empirical data to refuse and deny biological reductionism. Vertical causation is what I have said. From cultural factors can change social structures, and social structures can change our biology partially, of course. They are not, I mean, culture is not going to make us immortal. Culture is not going to make us alive in the core of a star. I mean, there are properties, there are features that we cannot change, but there are features that were once thought immutable, and we know that society and culture can shape and reshape those features. So this is vertical causation. So every social phenomenon is a multidimensional phenomenon. What do I mean by that? For instance, with the case of depression. Depression can be triggered by toxins in the environment. When I was living in China in 2015 and 2016, there was the so-called air apocalypse. The air pollution was horrible. We were unable to see in the distance. 30 meters of distance, it was like the fog, like this this book of horror. So I started to study how the depression started to skyrocket. And people said, well, maybe it's because they are not happy, because they don't see the light of the sun. No, there were biochemical reasons. The toxins, they had an impact in the brain. So if you break the circadian rhythm, if you don't sleep enough, if you break the circadian rhythms, if you eat toxins through the air, through the water, if you don't eat enough amino acids, if your hormone levels are unbalanced because of disease, you can have depression. So you can have depression sometimes mainly primary to a chemical or biochemical factor. But in other occasions, people have depression because they receive bullying, because they were born in dysfunctional families, because they were raised in totally pessimistic ideologies or religions. So the question is that similar or the same effects behind similar or the same effects, there can be different, totally different causes. So that's the problem, because it's some kind of reverse engineering. this person has depression, this person has depression, this person has depression. But he received bullying, he is not sleeping enough, he has a brain tumor, he's eating toxins because of water is polluted or because of whatever. The effect is the same. The serotonin levels, the oxytocin levels, whatever. The noradrenaline levels, the chemical imbalance can be very similar, but the chemical imbalance behind depression can be triggered by totally different causes. And in many occasions, it's not a matter of, oh, this is, in this occasion, it's chemical, it's biological, it's social. In many occasions, it's a convergence of different factors. And some factors can have more weight than others. And for that reason, one thing that both the book and my chapter tries is to move away to deny monocausal or one-dimensional explanations. They are tempting. What is a more one-dimensional explanation? Politicians love this. Behind a complex phenomenon, there is always a very single easy cause to determine. That's not the case. That's not the case. I remember in the 90s in Spain, violence in the streets was rising because of very many reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, cultural reasons, and some politicians started to blame video games or Super Mario Bros. People are playing or people are watching Dragon Ball too much. And this seems fun for us, but these politicians were real. And sometimes they had social psychologists hired by the politicians identifying one-dimensional causes behind extremely complex multidimensional phenomena, such as violence, such as depression, such as suicide. If there is a single factor that explains those phenomena, also easy, but it's not the case. For that reason, it's so difficult because we have to identify different factors behind suicide or behind whatever problem that we are addressing, and we have to identify which weight has this factor, this proportion, or this other, because it's one-dimensional or monocausal explanations are very easy to reject. If someone says the primary cause behind suicide is this, the only thing that you have to do is to search for another country in which the same cause happens, but the suicide rate is much lower. Or violence is produced by video games or comic books. No, because there are countries in which the consumption of video games or comic books is much higher and the violence rates are much lower, so there are hidden variables here. But politicians usually don't like hidden variables. I'm thinking about our Spanish politicians who love one-dimensional monocausal explanations. So some people can think, and I'm approaching to the end of my lecture, some people can think, okay, but what happens with Occam's razor? Occam's razor says we shouldn't multiply entities without necessity. And maybe we are making things more complex than needed. I think that Occam's razor is completely right. We shouldn't multiply entities without need, but in many occasions, there are more variables and more factors that we thought in the beginning, in everything, in every single thing. So it's not a matter of multiplying entities for the sake of multiplying entities. It's a matter of identifying real factors and real variables. Multidimensional variables can be physical or chemical, environmental, social, cultural, whatever, behind complex phenomena. So what are the conclusions? That we should move beyond our tendency to oversimplify complex, dynamic, and multidimensional realities. It's tempting. Behind a phenomenon, there is one single cause. No, because most effects that we observe are not the product of one single cause, but the convergence of many causes at the same time. It's also time to abandon simplistic binaries, whether aggression or violence, or this is biological or this is cultural. That kind of questions are wrong. Why? Because we have showed how the Baldwin effect, epigenetics, niche construction, brain plasticity, vertical causation, although obviously in a very summarized way, but we have demonstrated, or we have identified different mechanisms that totally reject or overcome this simplistic binary. This is completely biological, this is completely cultural. This binary, we have to overcome this binary and any simplistic binary, because reality is always very complex. Always very complex. It's tempting to have, this kind of Boolean or binary mechanism. This is on, off, yes, no, a good, bar. Things implies nuances, different perspectives. This doesn't imply relativism. It implies a far more complex view of reality that takes the multidimensionality of reality seriously. So complexity, multidimensionality, and dynamism can be epistemologically addressed or domesticated through multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. So, of course, there are many communities that talk to each other, but we have to promote much more dialogue between science and philosophy, between sociologists and biologists, between psychologists and economists, different disciplines, because they are all those disciplines are studying real phenomena, but only from one single perspective. So we have to remind here the elephant, the blind man, and the elephant, and they are fighting. Oh, no, this is not an elephant, it's a fan, it's a column, it's a wall, it's a snake, it's a whatever. No. It's a single elephant, but with many different perspectives. So social sciences, biosocial sciences, and philosophy are as important as natural sciences. This is very important. In many occasions, there are, such as my example with toxins, but toxins come from factories. And if we have factories polluting the rivers, it's also because of cultural norms, it's because of law, it's because of politics. So even when we talk about chemical elements that are creating a chemical imbalance in the brain, usually that chemical element, the toxins, it's far more complex than chemistry. It implies economy, it implies law, it implies custom, society, culture, history, traditions. So even with that, we have to go far than that. So if you want, maybe we can have now some dialogue or some questions and some. Again, the book there is with chapter 11 from Atsuko Fujino, there is a mistake that Springer is going to correct. So, because now the title says Overcoming the Nature versus Nurture Debate. This was the original title of the book. So this was like the working title of the chapter. But the real title of the chapter of Atsuko Fujino is Father's Involvement in Child Care, a Historical View on Nature and Nurture in Edo and Meiji Japan. So the book it will be freely accessible through many libraries, university libraries around the world, and we just hope to contribute. Again, thanks so much to Kajitani Sensei for contributing with an excellent chapter here on naturalism of mother's milk and its historical change in Japan, modernization of nature as normative concept. So we hope that we will contribute even in a small way to overcome simplistic binaries and to bring different communities together to talk about these fascinating topics that, as I said, they are not only speculative or theoretical, they have practical consequences. So thank you so much.